Good day and thank you for joining Civilnet. These recent developments in Armenia have caused a lot of concern here domestically and also in the diaspora. There have also been a lot of calls coming from Armenia to the diaspora calling for action, calling for condemnation of human rights violations here in Armenia. And we know that in different cities of America and different cities of Europe, there have been consolidation of people who are taking action. And today we're speaking with Zareh Sinanyan, former mayor of Glendale and a council member today. Thank you, Zareh, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rubina.
So Glendale, I've seen videos of people protesting and also city council session where they're demanding that action be taken regarding the human rights violations in Armenia, and also talk of hunger strike. I mean, could you explain more what's happening, because we have only seen the videos.
Certainly. Since July 17th, when the armed takeover of the police station took place, there was much activity in the community, and a group, relatively small group, began demonstrating every evening in front of the Armenian consulate in the city of Glendale, which is located in the city of Glendale. And not as much the actual takeover of the police base, but the following crackdown and the methodology used by the police to crack down on really demonstrators, and not even demonstrators, just random people, fueled this process. So as things escalated even further, the elected elected officials of Armenian ethnicity in the city of Glendale tried to stay out of the process and really not to make any statements one way or another, because being an elected official in a country other than Armenia puts certain restraints on one, and you don't want to necessarily comment on the internal affairs of a different country. But as things, like I said, as things that escalated, also the pressure on these elected officials escalated as well, because at the end of the day, we do represent the residents of the city of Glendale, of which 40–45% happen to be of Armenian ethnicity. And the group that was demonstrating ended up coming to council and demanding that council members make a statement stating their position on what's happening in Armenia. And I remember specifically that they said, state your position one way or another. It's fine, but do have a position. And if you don't, we're going to mount a hunger strike on the steps of the city council. In essence, that was the genesis of the council's engagement in this process.
And what was the reaction from the council? And in this case, given the circumstance, what can the Glendale City Council do, or how can it act?
Well, that's the fundamental issue here. A city council is a city council. All it has jurisdiction over is the city, and really has no authority over any foreign relations or any real authority to influence the situation. So if the council were to make a statement, it would have purely symbolic significance. It wouldn't be substantive. It wouldn't be able to really change anything. But I think whether the demonstrators understood that or not is kind of irrelevant, because they just wanted to know, the people who are elected to represent them in their city, what they stand for. I think that's what they wanted to hear. So at the first visit, the first visit happened before July 29th, the particularly violent crackdown on the demonstrators. And at that visit, I think the three individual council members, that includes me, of course, made a statement about what they think is happening and how they feel about it. The two statements were kind of general. The trouble. I think all the statements expressed trouble. Their concern for what's happening in Armenia. I personally, I don't specifically remember what else was said. I remember that I said that I've always been critical of, the inherent problems, the underlying problems that exist in Armenia that are behind.
We've had this conversation here in Civilnet about a month ago when you were visiting Armenia.
Exactly.
Another question, you said it was a relatively small group of people in a city where about 40% is of Armenian ethnicity. Why isn't there a larger group of people, a consolidation, and are they addressing their demands to the right person? Should they be demanding somewhere else from somewhere else? What kind of action do you think would be fit that the diaspora take to actually yield results?
You know, that's a great question, and I think it's endemic of sort of diaspora's approach to Armenia. I would answer it in two ways. One would be that diaspora still functions under the assumption that any criticism or any commentary about Armenian internal affairs is tantamount to almost like betrayal of the statehood, which I don't believe is the case. But nevertheless, diasporans do live outside of Armenia, and there's sort of this guilt complex that, well, we're not there, so do we really have the moral right to comment? That's one aspect of it. And the second aspect is the same as you see in Armenia. If you measure the degree of discontent in society, if there was actual polling done, I believe the numbers would be astronomical. But if you juxtapose that to the number of people that actually turn out to demonstrate or to express their discontent, there's, it's a tiny minority of those people that are actually unhappy with the situation. So same with the diaspora. You have a lot of angry people on social media, and you have a lot of concerned people watching TV and just conversing in their narrow circle of friends and family, but that doesn't necessarily translate into actual action.
And also, given that the diaspora is not very homogeneous, a part of the Glendale Armenian community is a relatively new community, a result of Armenia's inner political structure since independence. Well, is there more anger within those smaller circles, or the more traditional post-genocide diaspora is more vocal? Do you see a difference?
I've thought about that as well. I'm not sure that you can really categorize people. Well, if you're from the genocide, so the group that came directly after the genocide, you're more complacent or less complacent. And if you've just come from Armenia within the last 5 years, then you're more likely to be active and
my
vocal
approach was that their move from Armenia was the result of certain policies in Armenia. So while the post-genocide diaspora has relatively little experience in Armenia, be it in the form of visits, vacations, or even more deeply, however, they're not directly the result of Armenia's policies.
Sure, it's definitely a factor, and those that are sort of fresh from Armenia are more familiar with the underlying problems and issues in Armenia. But at the same time, those that just came from Armenia are probably more busy trying to establish themselves in this country, and are likely to not have really the time to engage in any civic activity. So it's a double-edged sword. That's why it's difficult to narrow things down to one group or another. But overwhelmingly, those that were demonstrating were more recent migrants, and probably more likely to be from Armenia.
There was an incident in front of the church as well, from what I understand. Have you heard of that, or do you know more about it?
I saw the same video, I think, that everyone else saw, and I don't know anything further than that. All I know is that the police was on the scene, and I'm very proud of Glendale Police Department because not once have they been in any way an impediment to the expression of civic discontent. But other than that, I really don't know the details. I did notice that after the July 29th crackdown, the group of demonstrators grew. It became much larger. So instead of the previous 40, 50 people, all of a sudden you had 150, 200 people demonstrating.
Well, a question that I asked, but we drifted from it. What do you think would be the ideal approach in this case, an approach that would actually yield results from the diaspora?
You know, I have to go back to that interview that you and I had about a month ago. And, you know, this approach should not be conditioned upon a crisis taking place in Armenia. It should just be a general approach that the diaspora adopts vis-a-vis Armenia. The diaspora should look at Armenia as its homeland, should look at itself as rightful owners of that country, whether they're currently residing there or not, because, you know, we know life is fluid. You just don't know what's going to happen next. And they should be more demanding of accountability and more demanding of the processes that are taking place in Armenia. Again, I realize that the levers of influence are at this point quite minimal, and perhaps that testifies to the mistakes that were made in the past when diaspora was the main source of funding coming into Armenia through charitable organizations, through remissions by family members. And that was the time when diaspora should have said, okay, this is what's expected of us, and we're ready to do it. But what are we getting in return? Are we getting good governance? Are we getting a fair and representative form of government? Is the justice system functioning? And that was not done. It's more difficult to exert that type of influence now because especially the Western diaspora has lost its influence in terms of remissions and in terms of the monies that are flowing to Armenia. But I think it's just not too late. It's not too late yet. So it has to be a comprehensive approach and should be a civil, honest relationship between Armenia and diaspora. And that's the solution.
Thank you for
Otherwise, we're going to migrate from one crisis to the other, and each crisis, as history has shown, is going to be more extreme than the next.
Well, what are the levers that the diaspora can use for that even minimal impact, positive impact on the situation in Armenia, even now, even after this interest in Armenia's domestic affairs being triggered because of a crisis?
Well, I think at this point, it's the organizations that need to make themselves be known and heard. I'm not implying in any way that they're not, because just because you don't hear their public statements doesn't mean that they're not working behind the scenes and not trying really hard to influence the government. But the organizations that are representative of larger groups of diasporan Armenians need to get their message across. They need to push on this issue in a systematic and organized manner and demand results. Demand results in short term, the things that need to be demanded are very basic, respect for democracy, fair elections, free elections, demonopolization of the economic system, taking some meaningful steps to combat corruption. A lot of people are still talking about sort of the evolutionary path for development in Armenia. And again, if we had a population of 30, 40, 50 million, and we weren't surrounded by two genocidal neighbors, that would be fine. We would take the next 50, 60 years to evolve into a more democratic society, but we just don't have that luxury. At this point, the population of Armenia is really tiny. And our neighbors, the smaller, the weaker the country gets, the bigger their appetite gets. And Azerbaijan, through the mouth of its president, explicitly speaks about taking over all of Armenia. What more proof do you need? So that's the problem. We need to act now. Diaspora needs to act now, and get some things changed in a manner where the population really feels like there's hope for the future.
Right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we thank the viewers for joining Civilnet as well. Stay with us. We'll be having similar conversations and bringing you the latest news from Armenia.